Welcome to Crafty Sourcer. If you're looking for a raw, unfiltered podcast on all things sourcing in APAC, you've come to the right place. Grab a coffee or wine and join your host and other guests as we dive deep into the complex and ever-evolving world of sourcing, keeping you informed on insights, tools, and even at times, a healthy sourcing debate or two. Now, here's your host, Denise Pereira from Kaleidosource. Settle in and let's get crafty.
Hello. Welcome back to another episode. My name is Denise Pereira and I'm your host of The Crafty Sourcer, where we talk about all things talent sourcing with guests who are no stranger to what talent sourcing can bring to your business. Today, we have another fantastic human who is well known in the Melbourne talent community for his dry sense of humor. But under that 6-foot exterior is a quirky, gentle giant, as I like to call him. Today, we're going to chat about planning for your sourcing strategy and what are some considerations we need to be keeping in mind. So let's get into it and let's get crafty. Simon McSorley, thanks for coming on today.
Glad to be here, my friend. Always happy to help and always happy to see you because we don't see each other well enough. I think the last time we saw each other IRL was probably at a meetup, but also in a lobby of a building in town like a couple of years ago, very briefly. So it's good to see you.
I think we see each other more often on LinkedIn, on each other's comments, liking and sharing GIFs and memes more than we do in person. So I guess that's the new lay of the land, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but hey, it is what it is.
Simon, before we get into it, quick intro for our listeners and what do you do outside of being a business owner?
Very quick intro. Hi, I'm Simon. This is my 18th year hard labor. I think the official term is hard labor in recruiting, always in tech. Did some time in agency world, was fortunate enough to get a role internally at Zendesk, hiring teams here in San Fran. Finished up that role and kicked off my current business crew, which is like outsourced or insourced talent teams for ambitious tech companies. Outside of being a business owner and recruiter, I'm probably actually very sad. Don't do a great deal, which when I say it out loud sounds awful, but we moved to the country a couple of years ago. So starting this weekend, starting down the track of making us totally self-sufficient in terms of growing all our own vegetables. So a huge veggie garden, irrigation, pretty much doing it all myself, teaching myself how to do it. I'm just going to grow all our own veggies and see if we can become self-sufficient. Like, why not? I think we can do it. Like other people can do it, so I'm pretty sure we can.
That's amazing. Well, Simon, you also cut your own hair, so you might as well add that to the list.
Never telling you any of my secrets again.
Simon, it's really impressive because, look, I've been following Crew for a few years and it is impressive what you do as a one-person business. You've even had your own team. You launched in 2018. You work with tech companies. What was the basis of starting Crew and how is it different to what is already out there?
Yeah. Thank you, firstly. When I came off that piece of work that year with Zendesk, I sort of had this thing in the back of my head that I thought there might be a model for a recruitment business where you worked on site with tech companies as an internal recruiter for a period of time to support whatever it is they're doing. They're probably going through a spike in hiring or they're down in staff, people away on leave, whatever. And so could you support them that way? And that was literally as sophisticated as it got. Was fortunate enough to find some clients pretty early, and then that sort of started gaining momentum. Then COVID happened, and probably like everybody, I sort of had a bit of a panic on what does this mean. But COVID was actually the kickoff for the growth that we had at the time. So at our peak, sort of 13 staff, and we had teams of recruiters on site with tech companies helping them with their hiring, but not just the hiring part, but the full gamut of what good quality TA does. So helping define roles, helping to map out the market, helping to understand costs of hiring from salaries, what should we be paying in the market, working with hiring managers who maybe hadn't had recruiters who've been working with them full time previously and helping them manage through the process. So that sort of gathered momentum. Obviously, the market sort of shifted in the tech space sort of last year. So we had to make some changes, but it was really an effort to just try and offer something different to a traditional agency. And I'll caveat all that by saying we still do some agency work. There's a time and a place for agencies, absolutely. And having solid agency partners should be a part of every talent team strategy.
Yeah.
But that's a long answer to a short question.
No, and that absolutely makes sense. And what is one of the biggest challenge that you've seen in running an embedded business?
Balancing supply and demand.
True.
And at our peak, I was leading sales, leading delivery, HR, training for our team as well. So it's a lot. And like some of the early sales calls we did, I was chatting to someone about this the other day. I think back to some of the early sales calls I do, and people would ask me to describe the business, and a year later you're still tripping over your words and trying to find the right way to describe it. But over time, I think it gets easier and it makes more sense. And I think the way that we describe it is probably just direct feedback we've had from customers. You're this. And they go, that's right. That is what we are. It's an evolution. But, supply and demand is challenging to manage.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm a fairly new founder myself in the embedded sort of space, and it's definitely demand versus supply. And as we're seeing, there's actually a massive dip sort of happening at the moment. And to your point about there's a time and place for working with agencies, being in agencies, I feel like this year is all about sort of collaborating and partnering with other businesses that probably have a bigger piece in the market, a bigger stake in the market, if that makes sense. I know you're a bit of a sourcing nerd. I've seen some of the stuff that you've put out there. Let's sort of talk about an ideal sourcing process of strategy, planning behind it. I know you love being very, very structured in how you do things. What are some sort of initial steps or considerations we need to be thinking of when we are planning our sourcing process, when we are working with a client or our hiring managers for that matter?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think anyone who knows me reasonably well will probably be sick of hearing me say that good hiring starts with good planning.
Absolutely.
If you don't know what you're trying to hire, I'm talking in terms of skill sets, experience levels. If you don't know what you're trying to hire, how will you know it when you see it, and how can you qualify it? Maybe that's just the way my brain defaults, but understanding truly the challenge that you're trying to solve, and that's all hiring is. It's people-based problem solving.
Yeah, absolutely.
So understanding the problem that you're trying to solve, getting alignment with your hiring managers, because when the hiring manager or a client says, we want a really good UX designer, their version of what really good is could be totally different to mine. So getting alignment on what really good looks like by having a good quality position description where it makes sense, where the people who are involved in hiring have had some input into the PD. I think makes sense to me. It seems like a logical way to start. I'm a big one for efficiency and not wasting time on things. Like if you're constantly having to go back and revisit things, it probably wasn't planned and communicated properly at the beginning. So you can burn a lot of time. And when you're managing multiple requisitions, multiple hires, multiple stakeholders, the one thing you probably don't have is time. So taking the time at the beginning to make sure that you're not burning time through the process, to me, seems to make sense. Qualifying what you're looking for, getting alignment on the PD, being able to ask like next level down questions, like why is this important? What's the impact if we don't get this? To me, just asking that question, probably for the last dozen or so years, has just been a game changer. What's the impact if we don't get that? Sometimes the answer is the impact is we don't get to do X, Y, Z, which means we can't release this feature, which impacts revenue or customer growth. Sometimes the response is, well, actually, there's no huge impact. It's just what we'd like. Okay, cool. So suddenly this changes the dynamic of what you're looking for. Understanding what you're looking for, getting agreement and alignment on that. I think good communication is important for all recruiters. So you're wrapping up a call with your hiring manager and you talk about next steps. From here, I'll be doing this, and this. This will happen, then that'll happen. You and I'll check in once a week on a call where I'll give you updates. You'll get an end of week report from me, just giving you some insight into where we're at. So you're not sat there wondering, I wonder what's going on. So we're all aligned. If this is the time frame that we think it's going to take, but if there's bumps along the road, us checking in regularly allows us to connect on that and refocus our efforts if we need to. I think being well planned, being really clear around expectations, because there's expectations of each other. I love it if I can pre-book interview slots, even if it's 6 weeks ahead, because that then gives me a time frame to work to. And I think one mistake we make as recruiters is we think that hiring managers understand all the things that we're doing, and quite often they don't. And when hiring managers or heads of TA or HRD say, how long is this going to take to hire? My question is, when you say take to hire, do you mean the person actually starting or till you get an offer out? If it's from now until the person starting, it's probably 3 months. If someone's working, they've got a month's notice period. We're probably a couple of weeks to get through an interview process, potentially a couple of weeks to get sourcing. So I thought you were going to jump in then. So you go.
You made a very crucial point over there, and I was actually thinking the exact same thing, is that hiring managers sometimes think they should actually ask recruiters as well, is that, what is your process? Talk me through your process. How is this all going to work out? Because you're right, because we can't assume that hiring managers know what is our role here and what we do. We should be explaining that from the onset on how this is going to work. And once we have all the information, we should list out what our next steps are going to look like from there onwards,
Yeah, I agree. We have some very particular terminology that we use that to hiring managers sometimes can be like a foreign language. So explaining this and talking through it is super important.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned, Simon, a few times was the word misalignment. And in a hiring process, usually outside of other reasons, the reason why relationships go pear-shaped is because of misalignment. The reason why we are not as effective, as efficient, we have to keep reinventing the wheel, keep going back for that one role, is because of that misalignment, because of the miscommunication, which also sometimes makes me think there's two sides to that. One is the recruiter, the sourcer, they don't know the area too well. They haven't built that relationship with their hiring manager, or they haven't really asked good questions, good clarifying questions, or the hiring manager is actually not good at what they do. I mean, a lot of people are in a hiring manager seat, but doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to hire. It makes me think few companies invest in training their hiring managers in from a recruitment side. In your experience, what do you sort of see, or why do you think hiring managers are not given the right training, the support, or the guidance when it comes to recruiting for their teams?
I think there's a couple of things. I think hiring managers who are early in their career in building teams, that's terrifying. The first time you've run a team, and you're for the most part, in my experience, people are, unless they're psychopaths, and I'm being serious, unless they have no comprehension of the outside world and it's all about them. A lot of hiring managers can find it incredibly intimidating running a team, leading a team for the first time. What if I do something wrong? What if I say the wrong thing? And so I think this thing of hiring is something that gets sort of pushed down the track, and we kind of never eventually get there until it's time to hire. I think there's also this thing, I've quoted it a couple of times, Tim Ferriss talks about the theatre of productivity. Learning how to hire and how to interview doesn't feel productive in the moment. Having team meetings and shipping things, and these are all things that make us feel productive, or make hiring managers feel productive. But sitting and thinking deeply about how we're going to articulate what our team does, how we're going to screen people, how we're going to interview people, it doesn't look and feel productive, but it's actually one of the most productive things you can do.
It is.
So look, I think there's, to your point, I think the responsibility of the clarity of that communication has to lie with the recruiter. But to me, that's part of your job. Being able to articulate the process, get checking in. Like, putting most of my clients and most of the teams in the past have always been sick of me saying things like, does this make sense to you? Am I being clear? What do you want to add? What do you think we've missed? But unless you're constantly checking in, how do you get that alignment? How does your version of what good hiring looks like resonate with the other person? So I think that's important. I think the other part of the answer to your question is recruiting's hard. It's got a lot of moving parts to it. Everyone's got an opinion about it. Because most people who've got the opinions have done one component of recruiting, but very few do the full cycle. And I think we all generally talk from our own experience. You and I are talking about our own experience, and that informs our worldview. So hiring managers are no different. They talk about the parts that they're comfortable with, that they know. Doesn't mean they're wrong, doesn't mean they're bad, but their view as a whole might be quite limited. So I think it's on us as recruiters to own the process, own the communication. And I think to do that, you kind of need to be confident that you know what you're doing in the first place.
Exactly.
And I think for new recruiters, new sources, they don't like, my observations, they don't like people thinking that they're unsure, so they don't ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And then that usually comes back to bite them.
And I think
sharing,
that's actually super helpful, Simon. And I think what also could be helpful for us as well as the hiring managers to kind of share what we do, right? And this is why we have sourcing jams, referral parties, whatever you call them. That's why we encourage recruiters, sources to sit with the engineering teams, to sit with the product teams, go to their stand-ups, understand what they're doing, because the more information you can give the candidate without what's just on a job description and what you've actually just taken from the hiring manager. Think of that storytelling you're doing from the get-go right through till the candidate goes to the hiring manager. And the more information they're getting already makes them feel like they're part and parcel of the team, right? Because you're giving them all this insider information, which is not confidential, but you can actually talk about it. So I think both sides actually see it as, again, that recruitment hiring is a team sport. The hiring managers are going to the hiring jam, sitting together, seeing how the recruiters are doing the searches, recruiters, sources sitting with the teams. I think it's a very, very good way to align yourselves to both sides of the party. The better we can understand each other, the better we'll operate. Yeah, absolutely.
To your point, I was at a team retro yesterday that went for an hour, and it got really granular on some things. Talking about some specific API call challenges that we had, and some very specific feature challenges that we need to get better at. But I remember sitting there thinking, candidate call that I've got later this afternoon, some of this is going to be really helpful when I know I'm going to get asked what sort of things am I going to be working on in an early stage business. And having been at this retro for an hour and it getting tense in a good way, like not tense isn't the right word, but very focused. That's perfect fuel for that conversation. So back to your bigger question, getting alignment, getting clarity on what you're looking for, being able to communicate what happens next to your hiring manager. Talk timeframes. I like this idea of show, don't tell. So if you can show your hiring manager, this is what I'll be doing, show them how you write job ads or show them how you run searching. So exactly what you're talking about. Show, don't tell is just one of those things that's always in my mind. So if you're so organized that you run a project board of some kind, whether it's in Notion or Asana,
love Notion.
Hiring managers, I show them a plan for their role in Notion or Asana, whatever you're using, and you talk them through it. It shows them that you know what you're doing, and it gives you confidence, and it allows you to have trade-offs on timeframes and requirements and that sort of thing. So I think if you're well organized, I think recruiters and sources specifically need to be really well organized. Then I think if you're able to exude some confidence and some organization, your hiring manager will go, there is a process to this. There is a specific way that we do things, and such recruiter knows what they're doing. I feel confident that we're in good hands.
Simon, you spoke about being organized, and I know, like I said earlier, you're very organized, and I know you brought a little something to share with us. If you're happy to, do you want to share a little snippet of how you get yourself organized right before the call or right after the call, and sort of talk through what your plan of action is going to look like?
Yeah. I think we've got a bit of an internet issue there. I think I'm probably lagging for you, and you're lagging for me. But yes, I can absolutely do that.
Did it come? Awesome.
It just lagged a little bit at this end. I think I got what you're saying. Going into those calls, depending on, it's all got nuance to it, right? If I've already been given a PD for a role, and hey, you need to speak to Jim, whoever, this is the PD, can you help me get hired in this role? I'll go into that conversation with a PD and just I guess just a process that I have in my head that I already know, talking about all the things we've just spoken about. So really trying to understand, if I don't already, really trying to understand the role. I mean, luckily for most of the work I've done recently, I've been in the teams that I've hired for. Gone to stand-ups, been to the retros, all the things that we've just discussed. So you sort of come armed with some of that context, and I hope I'm not lagging too much. You sort of come armed with some of the context that then allows you to have that conversation. But then again, coming out of it from a planning perspective, if you start getting into the sourcing side of things, I think in two ways around sourcing. And I think it's important to to understand this. I don't hear it spoken about that much, but sourcing falls into two categories: inbound and our outbound sourcing. So what are they? Inbound is where we're driving candidate traffic in to us, so into our ATS, job ad, whatever we're running. So we're driving candidates into us. Outbound is when we're going out, speaking to potential candidates. They're not candidates yet, they're potential candidates who are probably in jobs already somewhere else. And we think that based on the information that we have, that their profile might match the requirements of the role, and we want to try and have a conversation with them. So I think it's important to think the inbound and outbound. When people say to me, all they did was put an ad on Seek and interview people and then they found someone. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The thing is, we don't know where our candidate's going to come from.
Yeah.
So we've got to spread that net really as far as we can. There's pros and cons to both. If you're relying solely on inbound, you need to understand that your inbound is potentially going to lack quality. It's going to have high quantity, depending on the market you work in. And all those applicants you have competition for, because they're not just applying to your role, they're applying to other roles. Yeah. So there's challenges there that you need to build some kind of system to be able to work through that. So again, being able to identify really, really rapidly which candidates, which applicants you want to be able to talk to. Some ATSs and some AI is great for that sort of stuff. Some keyword matches and that sort of thing, some ranking within ATSs. That's brilliant. With your outbound, the potential challenges you face there are your target size of the subsector that you're going for. There might only be 20 people who match the skill set and the experience level that you're looking for. And if all those people are happily employed, then you might get a low response rate. So then how do you make your message more enticing to them? I know you did a session with Mitch Sullivan around great ad writing. I think good copy for when you're approaching people, good messaging is super important as well. So again, this comes back to being able to deliver them context, because you go to retros and you've got the context of the role that can feed your outbound. So I think the skill for a sourcer is being able to understand these two areas, inbound and outbound, and rapidly activate a campaign. We talk about each role as a campaign, and rapidly activate a campaign that should deliver you the results. Yeah. So if we split that out then for your inbound, understanding where are the online channels that you're inbound, so you're advertising, and I'm not talking about just advertising on job boards, but you're advertising a role. Where are those channels? Which are the best ones that are best suited, where your target audience is hanging out, where you can drive relevant candidates to you? Understanding that is pretty important. And I can share a screen. Let me see if I can do that right now. So for people who are listening, I'll put I'll send Denise some details of this, and she can have a look. So this is one of our own sheets. So I'm also a big believer in efficiency and not having to start again every single time you kick off a role. So if you're hiring, if you're going to consistently hire roles of a specific type, replicable processes and ways you can accurately launch a campaign because you've already got all the information seems to me to make sense. So big one for spreadsheets. People will roll their eyes, go, God, no, the world doesn't need another spreadsheet, but I'll always say yes to another spreadsheet. So this is a sheet, basically, you can see the tabs along the bottom. These are sort of role or sector specific, if you like. The tabs across the top are the online channels, so Slack channels, meetup groups, LinkedIn groups, Facebook groups, and then Discord servers that are relevant to software engineering. So if I'm hiring for a Java developer, I've got lists here of Slack channels where I think Java developers will hang out, and I can post my advertising into those channels. So very simplistically, what I do is I'll make a copy of this sheet. I'll call it Java developer. I'll delete anything that isn't relevant, and just condense this into a single tab. And these are the channels that over the course of the next few weeks, I'll start dropping content into.
Amazing. Do you share this with your hiring manager as part of the planning and strategy as well, to say, this is our target, this is where we're going to go, this is where we're going to be reaching out, these are our platforms?
Yeah, quite often I'll share this. They
Yeah.
might be in on some. They might say, "Hey, I'm in Dev ANZ." When I see it in there, I'll give it a like, and I'll say to people, "Hey, if they want to talk to me directly, they can do." And I'm like,
Perfect.
"You beauty," and I try and sound more Australian. You beauty. So I think having this sort of thing is really handy. You'll see here by next to some of the titles, there's some numbers. That's the size of that community. So 18,000 here, 2,700 here. So basically what you're able to do is understand, hey, I can get this role in front of potentially a couple of 100,000 people within the space of a day. That might start driving the right kind of traffic my way. So when you combine this sort of thinking and the ability to know exactly where your advertising is going, you combine that with being able to run, when you think about now outbound, you can run some very targeted searches and very targeted messaging on LinkedIn Recruiter, for example. You've now got a couple of ways of attracting candidates. Some people who might be active in the market now. This outbound might also target the people who aren't necessarily looking, but your job ad might just ring something interesting with them and they'll hit you up for a discussion. But thinking like this, I think, gives you the ability to rapidly activate a campaign. You can tweak this as you go. I've got to jump in here later on this afternoon because some of these LinkedIn groups we just don't get any response from. Like, there's no point just keep. I go into some of those LinkedIn groups, and the last post in there was one from me 3 months ago. So some of the channels you learn over time, they're just not that active. So you might as well just can them. Like, it's where you get your most bang for your buck. So does that all make sense?
I love this. I love this, Simon, because what this shows is you go in at whether right before the intake, knowing what you're going to be hiring for, some knowledge of what you're hiring for, but what you're also showing is you're building credibility and trust from the get-go of your area, your patch. And you're right, because you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel and create new Boolean strings. You can use the same Boolean strings. You just have to change the words and the titles or whatever that looks like. I love how structured this is. And here's another search string page for everyone who's going to be watching this.
Yeah. So I've just, for people listening, I've just changed screens I'm sharing, but pretty much every time I run I build a search string for something, I just save it. As soon as I cut and paste it into Google, I just cut and paste it into Doc as well. And I probably need to organize this a bit better. I mean, this pretty much goes on for weeks, but again, I can just do a Control F, and if there's a specific comment I'm looking for, I can just search for that in here. But I could probably organize it better. But I mean, this one here is probably not a bad example. I might just expand that for people who are maybe watching this. This is taken directly from a brief, and on the subject of sourcing strings, I think one thing that I see with particularly with new sources, sometimes, like, if it doesn't work straight away, they give up. Like, the amount of times I've run some sourcing training where we talk about search strings and people will write a string and it doesn't give them the results they want. To go, well, that didn't work. Bloody hell! Like, what was the point of this? Like, you sometimes this is iteration. You've got to tweak and think deeply about what it is that you're actually searching for, because you're not always going to get it right first time. And sometimes just the slightest change on how you're searching and the words that you're putting in some parentheses, for example, can vastly change the result that you get. So
absolutely,
playing around.
It's also, the thing is that, and I think this is why a lot of people don't get into sourcing, is because they put in the too hard basket. You're right, because they give up. You have to go down rabbit holes because you spend a lot of time cross-referencing half of the time. Think about how the candidate describes themselves. Right.
Yeah.
A lot of the times they even incorrectly spell the word developer or engineer. So you've got to take that and also look at platforms like, people use Chrome, but what about DuckDuckGo? What about Bing? You actually get different results if you use the same search string across all three. So people need to not only rely on Chrome, but that's the most extensively used search engine. But think about DuckDuckGo, you actually get better results on there. So people need to be thinking along those lines.
Yeah. I think the other thing as well, I think once you start I think the more you do this, your thinking around it starts evolving. You do get a bit more nerdy, but I think something I've learned probably in the last few years is to search for the activities that you want this person to do, not just necessarily the skills that you're looking for. Like the skills are one thing, like the technical skills is one thing, but what's the purpose of this function? So for this role specifically, you can see here, we needed someone who had experiences leading distributed teams, or overseas or globally dispersed teams. So I was just thinking of different ways to describe this, and this actually, was a this string actually worked really well. So thinking about searching for the activities that this person is going to be doing, not just the technical skill set. Like they're kind of two different things. Because if I just search for a software development manager in a certain tech stack, I'd have got a whole bunch of those. But for the most part, they would probably have all just been local, managing local teams, and that's not what we needed for this specific role. So probably just a good one for people to play around with. When you've got the time to sit and play around with strings, just think differently about what is it I'm actually looking for. So people might find that helpful. And then again, I think I've got this.
I think it's also a good place. Even with the search string, Simon, it's also a good time where you can actually bring in, your hiring manager, or even, people from the hiring management team, and ask them, if you were, what terms would you use? Because sometimes people use different terms, and see because a bird's eye view, right? Different people have different perspectives. You might get different results. And this is why people have sourcing jams as well, is because it just gives you a whole different set of results that you may not have come across. Not that you were doing anything wrong. I always say sourcing, there's no wrong way of doing sourcing. You just do it differently.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is one that worked sort of quite well for me, just thinking differently around how to find engineers in Melbourne that were C# engineers who had their email on their resume. So just sitting around and playing with some of these. I was thinking this one here. I was thinking about who else is advertising specific roles. So some of the major ATSs also have their own jobs page. So you can. I was in on a conversation yesterday about the hidden job market, and I sent a couple of these sorts of links to someone. And they went, I found a whole bunch of jobs that venture capital firms, VC firms, were advertising through their portfolio. And sometimes I think Airtree at the moment have got like 700 roles on their Getro board. That's for anyone listening. That's the VC fund has portfolio companies who are all advertising roles, and they all put them all together in one space. So if you're someone in tech looking for a role, with a startup or a scale up, they're good places to go. So.
And another one is even attendees. I think that's sometimes such an overlooked way to find easy sort of people, like passive people sort of sitting over there is attendees. So many underutilized sort of ways to find people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a big fan of just straight Google searching, platform searching for a while. And this sort of string for me has generally worked pretty well. So this the pre part here. So just looking for online profiles, online resumes, online CVs of people whose CVs are publicly available. They may know that they are publicly available. They may not. Don't know. And then these are obviously then the titles as well. The specific skills and locations that we're looking for. And I think it's a really underutilized one. I remember showing this to a hiring manager once. And he said, "So, what platform are you searching on this?" I went, "Google." I went, "Yeah, but that's the search engine you use. But what platform are you searching?" I went, "No, Google. Like we're running a search on Google." And I showed it to him. And he said,
exactly. I think even a lot of recruiters tend to get really surprised that you can find email addresses, you can find phone numbers, you can find resumes that people have put out there. Like even if you go to like about me sections, like even under GitHub, there's so many different ways. But that's what I love about sourcing is that you have to go down a rabbit hole, because you are going to discover so many things that you didn't even know was out there for that one person. Which is so interesting. But thank you so much for showing that, Simon. Let's talk one more. Well, actually, two more questions from me, Simon, and then
Yeah.
I'll let you go. Let's talk a little about tech stack, and I think
Yeah.
it's really important whether you're a recruiter, whether you're a sourcer, how simple or challenging. And you obviously run your own business as well. You work with so many amazing companies. How simple or challenging is it to build out your own tech stack? Like, what does it take, and what are some considerations people need to be thinking of? I mean, budget is obviously one thing.
So I think you're talking like from a TA, like a broader TA perspective.
Yeah, just even like, let's say sourcing, recruiter,
Yeah,
like let's say, you're working with
yeah.
the client, you're helping them build out a tech stack.
Yeah. I mean, I think a good quality ATS is a must. And on ATSs, I think the one thing I don't see it happen enough is someone in talent teams. It should probably be talent ops, and our friend Stefan will probably roll his eyes, but I don't see enough database management. I don't see enough codification of communities in databases. Like every engineer that comes in should be going into a bucket somewhere. Like if we're never going to be able to hire them, they should get deleted. Making your ATS part of your sourcing plan, like that should be part of one of the first places you go to.
Absolutely.
So, think about your ability to manage your own data, the people that you hire, the people who apply, who you interview and you love, but they're not quite right for a role now, but you want them to be right for something. You think they're going to be suitable for something down the track. How do you stay in touch with them? So are you doing your own newsletter to candidates once a month? Are you scheduling an hour a month just to pop in calls, like just quick check-in calls with those people that you interviewed that you really liked? Like these are all really good quality, high quality activities that can save you time. Like if you never had to write a search tree again and go off hiring people, because you could manage your own applications and manage those relationships that are coming from those applications, that to me would make sense.
Exactly.
Sourcing is time consuming. If you didn't have to do it, but you could put the time into managing your own relationships, that's logical to me. So, but again, this thing of the theatre of productivity, it doesn't feel in the moment, and to some managers, it doesn't feel like it's productive right now, but it's about delivering results in the future. So I think it's a balance.
And that's one reason why with Kaleidosource, I came up with this solution around candidate pipeline management, because in the workshops, I was constantly, one of the roundtable conversations we were having was around pipeline management. And then I ran a survey with about 60 head of TAs and recruitment leads. And one thing that kept coming out of that theme was, we don't have the tools, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, we don't have the budget. And I was like, but this is not rocket science. You have everything at your disposal. You've already got the ATS. Majority of companies already have ATSs. You've got consent from the person because they've applied directly to you. All you have to do is just carve out time. You don't have to do it every day. You don't have to do it weekly. You just have to carve out time. People are not always interested in a job. Find out what are the other motivators. Do surveys. Run surveys with them. What else would they want to hear about if not just jobs? Get them interested in other ways into exactly.
Yeah.
Am I lagging still?
There was just a little bit then, but I absolutely got what you're saying. I'm a big advocate for like if you can own your own destiny in terms of managing your own data. Like we all bang on about data-driven recruitment, but if you can't manage your own destiny in terms of the data that you hold and that you have coming in daily from applications, you're missing a big component and a big potential really good channel. So So I think a good ATS to start with. I think some method of discovery tools. So whether you use Apollo, Hunter, Lucia, there's a whole bunch of them. So I think discovery is a key thing. I personally, I'm not a big one for recruitment bots that are having chats with people, and I think that's just because I don't do enough volume. I think those things are really well suited to other sectors. I haven't had much joy or much of a good response with them here. So I think good discovery tools, have this sort of constant debate with people whether having a LinkedIn recruiter license or not is needed. I'd probably flip from month to month. So I'm kind of I'm a bit sort of on the fence whether you do or you don't. But I think that I think if you're someone who's wanting to develop a career in sourcing, there's so much goodwill in the market. People who will share info. You're a shining example of this. But there's so much freely available information out there. There's so many blogs being written. There's so many links from vendors as well with stuff. I'm just looking in my bookmarks now. I have a pure sourcing tab in my bookmarks. It's probably like 60 things in there that if I'm ever feeling short of inspo for something, I'll just jump into there and find it. One thing that I do have that I use pretty much daily, and I will share. I'll pop them into a. I'll share the links with you. It's some simple JavaScript code applets that you can put in your toolbox, where very basically you're on a LinkedIn profile for a software engineer, you highlight their name, you hit your applet, and you go straight to their GitHub repository.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So some of these simple efficiency things I still use all the time. So I've got one for Medium. So if you're someone who hires in the sort of creative space, people who write a lot, then Medium will work. Git search, simple. And then the LinkedIn search, the use case there might be you're reading a press release about a tech company that's hiring, and the CTO is talking about XYZ, and you think that company runs a similar tech stack to you, and you want to understand if there might be people that are available or open to discussion from there. You can highlight his name, go to the LinkedIn search applet, and it'll take you to his LinkedIn profile. And from there, you can then start doing some digging. Yeah. So I'll share those with you.
There's so many different ways to find someone, right? There's no one way to find someone. And this is what people ask me is that, should I get rid of my LinkedIn recruiter license? And I'm like, look, every time I've had a recruiter license, I've barely used it because I've always found different ways to find people. I'm like, look, if you have it and your company can afford it, keep it. But if you're a one-person business, I would say there are different ways of finding people and use that money in other areas where you can. Simon, one more question, and this actually comes from Darren Bush from the UK, and he listens to the podcast every now and then. So we started this new sort of segment where people will put in questions, and then we put it out to our guests that come on. What metrics do we need or should be in place to measure a sourcer?
What metrics could you use to measure? I think measuring, there's so many things that a sourcer does. I think it's easy to get caught up in metrics, but I think the metrics should be of the things that move the needle significantly for you. So I think that's the first thing. I think messaging, like which messages resonate the most with. So if you're going outbound, which messages are giving you the best return rate? Again, in the same way that I save every search string, I pretty much save every outbound message I've ever done. I should categorize them a bit more as well. I kind of loosely have the ones that work well for engineers, ones that work well for designers. For me, I have one that the subject line of messages is really important. The one that works for me the most is blatant recruiting clickbait. Like people get that in a message, you're going to open it. You're laughing. Like people are going to open it. So again, with messaging, we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole, but that's what sourcing does. What's the purpose of the message? The subject line is just to get somebody to open the message. The message is what is trying to get them to get a response. Get a response, you want a conversation. You send out a message, you're not trying to hire that person straight away. You're only focusing on what's the next part of the step. This is like service design, right? When you're thinking about service design, like how do you iterate on the next step? So the subject line is only to get them to open the message. The message is only to get them to respond. The response is just for you to get a conversation. So blatant recruiting clickbait. I haven't measured it recently, but I'd say I get over 75% response. And most people go, mate, that was hilarious. Happy to have a chat, or that was brilliant. Love your subject. Hey, I'm not in the market. But I get responses from them. So I think that's one example. But measure the metrics are the things that can make the biggest impact on what you're doing. So I think response rates from outbound. I think response rates from your inbound. So how can you do that? If you're running an ATS like Smart Recruiters, like Greenhouse, you can create a separate URL for each posting. So that URL points back to your job ad, but you assign that to a channel. So if you can take the time, so going back to my channel's master list, you could create a separate URL for each of those channels that you're going to use. Say you're going to use 10. separate URL for each of those. That's the URL you post into your job ad that goes into that channel, and you name it. And then when applications come through from that channel, that'll tell you which channels are the most productive.
Yeah,
that might help you refine your list even more. Because if you did 10 channels and you only ever got responses from 3, dump the other 7. You're probably never going to need them again. These are the 3 that give you the best response. That's where you should spend your time. If that was in Slack, for example, when you go to your Slack community group, you can see the names of all the people there. If you're getting most of your responses from that Slack channel, maybe that's where you need to spend your time messaging people directly. Like maybe that's the way you need to go. So every sector is slightly different. So the metrics that you choose probably would change, but they're the ones that jump out to me the most. The ones that have the highest impact on the return you're getting for the work you're doing.
I think it's also very important to, first of all, classify on what kind of roles the source is going to be working on. And not just being pulled in every direction. And then, okay, just because you're working on a product manager role, we're going to actually, your metrics are this number of people that you've reached out to, because people, for some reason, assess you based on quantity. And if you punch out 200 numbers and you get 100 people in and then 50 come in and then 5 are shortlisted, you're good at sourcing, which is not actually really true. That was awesome. Simon, you're a world of wisdom, as I always say. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I'm sure that, so many people listening, watching are going to find this to be super, super valuable. So thank you, my friend, for coming on. I appreciate you.
You're more than welcome, my friend. Lovely to be here. Happy to help.
Thanks, everyone. And stay crafty.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. And we'll be back next week with another exciting episode. If you found this valuable, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, happy sourcing and stay crafty. Until next time.